Hostage, a Todd Mills mystery, book 3 in the series. Author R.D. Zimmerman, publisher Scribble Pub. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 11. It all happened much more quickly than Todd would have expected. The applause from the main dining room didn't simply signify that Claritin had finished speaking and it was time for questions, but that Claritin, with his politically flaunted punctuality, had concluded his roundtable luncheon and was moving on to the next item on the agenda. Todd and Bradley were still taping a preview when Johnny Claritin himself walked in. "Ah, shit," muttered Bradley, standing up behind the camera. Todd was so surprised that he jumped up and started walking around the lights, the lav mic still attached to his lapel. He was almost all the way to the congressman when he reached the end of the mic cord and the clipped mic nearly pulled off his suit coat. "Yikes," he muttered, unclipping the mic with shaking hands and tossing it over the back of a chair. Straightening his coat and tie, he looked up just as the congressman trailed by an assistant and an obvious bodyguard approached him. Claritin was thought Todd, taking a quick, nervous appraisal of him, definitely as wholesome looking as reported, with a clean, smooth face, receding hairline, and wearing a crisp white shirt and gray suit. He was, however, definitely shorter than Todd had imagined. Almost small, really. On first glance, he seemed very much the average guy next door. On further study, Todd could sense the energy burning within. The eyes were moving, the hands fidgeting. He was obviously very much a damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead kind of guy. "Good afternoon, Mr. Claritin," said Todd, struggling to regain his composure and holding out his hand. "I'm Todd Mills from WLAK-TV. Hi. You the one doing the interview?" He looked Todd up and down, then turned to Bradley. "Or is it you? Which one of you's the gay one?" As much as he would have liked to brush aside the comment as silly and inane, Todd was sure someone had just slammed a door into his gut. He tried to say something, but his voice was all but gone. "I'll be doing the interview," Todd finally said, although his voice was weaker than he would have ever imagined. "And yes, I'm gay." He paused, struggled to regain his mental equilibrium, and forced himself to add, "However, that's certainly none of your business." "Well, of course it is," shot back Claritin, his voice big and authoritative. "I just want you to know how sick I am of all this AIDS crap. I just want you to know that I won't be talking about it, understood?" In disbelief, Todd stared at Claritin. He then glanced at Claritin's assistant, a woman with a smile permanently plastered on her face, and his bodyguard, a meaty-looking guy with brown hair. Getting no reaction from either of them, Todd turned to Bradley, who stood by his camera, so dumbfounded he wasn't even moving. Perhaps they should call the whole thing off before they even began. Todd wasn't going to take shit like this. No, not at all. Thinking it through in a flash, he realized that if worse came to worse, he could always do a report simply on this conversation, explaining it on air why the interview hadn't taken place. Trying to maintain a steady presence, Todd drew a line in the sand saying, WLAK was not informed of any restrictions regarding this interview. Claritin's assistant, a young woman wearing a navy blue dress suit, complete with one of those white frilly things at the throat that was supposed to emulate a tie, jumped forward, blurting, "I believe I spoke to you, Mr. Mills, and you have to understand, it's just been—" "No, Carol. What he's got to understand," interrupted Claritin, "is that there are certain things—" "By the way, this is off the record," inserted Carol. "Who cares?" said Claritin with a wave of his hand. "I just was going to tell him that, frankly, I'm sick of gays screaming this and that and begging for special treatment." Barely able to hold in his anger, Todd, his voice dripping with sarcasm, said, "Thank you for sharing that with me. I mean, like I was just saying in the other room, why should tax dollars of good American families go for medical aid and research to pay for a bunch of deviants who fuck too much? But like I said, I don't want to get into this today. I'm here to talk about my book. That's what I want to talk about. My book." "Yes," said Carol. "We set up an interview with you, Mr. Mills, to talk about Mr. Claritin's novel. Do you know it's already on the New York Times bestseller list? Isn't that just super?" He stared at this shrimp of a man, Did he dare tell him what he thought? Todd turned again toward Bradley. What should he do? Forget the whole goddamn thing? It was then that Todd saw what Clariton obviously hadn't. The tiniest of LED lights on Bradley's camera. Not only was the light burning a very distinct and unmistakable red, but the camera was aimed right at Clariton. "Excuse me," muttered Todd. "This might be too good to be true," thought Todd as he hurried over to Bradley. It might be too unbelievably incredible. "Oh my God, Bradley," said Todd. His voice hushed. "Don't do anything real obvious. Just tell me it's true. Is your camera on?" "What? Oh, Bradley's eyes darted to the side, took it all in. "Holy shit. It is. I didn't turn it off." "What about the lav mic?" Todd nodded to the mic, which was dangling from a chair right in front of Clariton. "Would it have gotten what he just said?" "Tell me it did." Bradley bit his lip, started chuckling. "Oh, yes, it's real sensitive. It would have gotten everything." Barely able to contain himself, Todd clasped Bradley on the shoulder and said, "There is a God." He took a deep breath and smiled. This was it, handed to him on a gold platter. Johnny Clariton's true thoughts, as expressed bluntly and crudely in his own words. Nothing else mattered. Who cared now how the interview went? Todd had it all, and then some. People such as his mother loved Johnny Clariton because of his freshness and vivacity, because he projected himself as a dynamic leader, a great American one, kind, just caring, wise. People such as his mother, however, would be disgusted to hear Johnny Clariton's personal views expressed so hideously. This was no wise man, no mythical leader who could lead America the Beautiful back to great times. This guy was a pig, and Todd now had the tape to prove it. Suppressing divine pleasure, Todd turned around and said, "I know you're on a tight schedule, Mr. Clariton, so why don't we get started?" "Yes, of course," Clariton called his bodyguard. "Lyle, stand by the door and make sure no one else comes in, all right?" "Yes, sir," replied the large man. "Let's be quick about this," continued Clariton. "I'm signing at another bookstore in St. Paul," interjected Carol. "Right, St. Paul, and we have to be there at 2 o'clock. "Yes, at 2, and then it's back to Washington." Looking at Todd, Carol said, "The congressman is very busy. He has a budget meeting this evening." "Okay, then, let's get going." Todd went over and took his dangling mic, then motioned to the chairs. "We'll sit over there." Yes, very good," said Clariton, as if he had done this 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 cities. Clariton let himself be directed into place and let Bradley attach the lav mic to his lapel. Almost passive, as people fussed around him, he seemed to drift away. Perhaps he was merely relaxing, zoning out for a few seconds. But as soon as the lights came on, the politician turned back on too, and Clariton's face brightened. His eyes opened wide, and a charming grin appeared. Todd took his notes from his briefcase, glanced at them one last time, and tossed them aside. Actually, he didn't really need any of this interview, for he already had material, and then some, to skewer Clariton. That, in turn, afforded Todd some room. Sure, what the hell? He could take this almost any which way he wanted. "By the way," said Todd as he attached his own mic and tried to hide the wire beneath the folds of his suit, "I read just this morning that you have a reputation for spouting off right before an interview. That wouldn't be your way of sabotaging things now, would it? You say something cocky, it throws the reporter off balance, and you get the upper hand. Is that how you work? And is that why you were trying to do by demanding to know who's gay?" Todd looked up at Clariton, who was looking back, a smarmy smile on his face. "Well, you have to admit I did catch you off guard," said Clariton with a chuckle. "But no, I was just letting you know what was out of bounds to talk about. If I wanted to throw you off, I'd tell you who told us you were gay." Todd tried not to swallow the bait, tried not to show the tension that went zipping through him. "I think you're doing it again, being unpleasantly devious." "But wouldn't you like to know?" taunted Clariton. "I'm sure you'd find it interesting." "Actually, I don't care," lied Todd as coolly as he possibly could. "First of all, I would hope your staff is astute enough to know what is common knowledge. Second, all anyone has to do is ask me." "Well, I didn't even have to ask, did I?" Todd glanced at Claritin, saw the triumphant grin on that boy next door's face. No, thought Todd, I won't be beaten like this. I won't. Todd took a deep breath. Once he had known all too well how to control himself. From being closeted for so many years, he had learned to keep his true emotions from showing on the surface, which in turn had helped him get as far as he had in broadcast journalism. However, as he now struggled not to be paranoid, not to obsess over who was talking behind his back, he knew that he couldn't just sit there and take this. Hell no. He had to go on the offensive, and so he drew his own weaponry, his favorite question for straight men. In a hushed voice, he asked, "Let me ask you this, Congressman Claritin. Have you ever had a same-sex experience?" The stupid grin on Claritin's face vanished, and he pulled back, his eyes tight and hateful. And then after a moment he said, "I won't even bother responding to that." You don't have to. When a straight guy hesitates like that, it always means yes. Shut the hell up. That's ridiculous. Maybe. Maybe not. Todd then sat back and said in an almost cheerful voice, "But if you want to sabotage someone's self-confidence, that's how you do it." Almost out of nowhere, Todd suddenly realized something else. "You know, I just now figured out why you agreed to an exclusive interview with me. You're using me to legitimize yourself. You want to be seen talking nicely to a very public gay man, so voters with gay sons and daughters and friends won't think you're too homophobic. Well, I'm not sure it's going to work." With a smile, Todd turned to the camera. "Okay, Bradley, let's get things going." Bradley bent down to the camera, focused one last time, then said, "Okay, here goes." With the tape rolling, Todd, feeling stronger and more confident than he had in months, smiled and said, "Congressman Claritin, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon." Looking anything but thrilled, Claritin took a deep breath and forced himself to say, "It's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful city of hard-working citizens." He paused and added, "This is truly one of the greatest places in our country." "Yes, actually it is. Now, just a few minutes ago you told me you would not be discussing AIDS or quote-unquote deviant sex. What is it, sir, that you are prepared to discuss?" Claritin squirmed in his seat and with a stern voice said, "My book." "Of course, you're not here on a political campaign. You're here as part of a book tour. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've written?" "It's a science fiction novel, set in the future in the year..." "Of course, it's set in the future. That's what makes it science fiction." "Ah, right. And..." Todd interrupted, saying, "I understand there are quite a lot of allegations surrounding the book, among them that you didn't write a single word of it. Is that true? Did you work on it at all?" "People do gossip, don't they?" "There's also criticism that you'll be making upward of $4 million in royalties." "What can you say about that?" Claritin started to say something, stopped, then retrenched himself and put on a politician's smile, big and plastic. "Now come on, Todd. Must you really be so antagonistic? You know I didn't come to Minnesota to be attacked." "Sir, with all due respect, as an elected official, it's your duty to respond to the people who elected you. I, for one, can only..." A muffled explosion rocked the room, and not more than 2 seconds later a shrill alarm started blasting. Todd sat forward, looked around, saw Claritin's bodyguard Lyle become terribly alert. What the hell was going on? That was from somewhere inside the building, wasn't it? "That's a fire alarm," said Bradley, standing up from behind the camera. "Now what?" snapped Claritin. Todd suggested, "Maybe something caught fire in the kitchen." "Oh my God!" gasped Carol, pointing to one of the vents. "Smoke!" A thick, dark waft of smoke came pouring out of the vent, and Lyle said, "Mr. Claritin, if you'll come with me, sir." The very next instant, a single sprinkler kicked in, spraying water down on the equipment. "Ah, Christ, my camera!" snapped Bradley. Before he could be shocked, Todd yanked off his mic, then lunged at Congressman Claritin, and did the same. Working as speedily as possible, Bradley shut down the lights, next turned to the camera and started detaching it from the tripod. "Bradley, give me the tape!" demanded Todd. For whatever happened, he couldn't lose that very special tape of Claritin's comments. Bradley popped open the camera and threw the videotape at Todd, who caught it and stuffed it in his briefcase. Quickly getting soaked, Todd returned to Bradley's side, the two of them dismantling the equipment and throwing it in the nylon bags. "You all go ahead," shouted Todd to Claritin. "We'll be right behind you. Go out the door and take 2 rights. The escalator's right there, and then it's a clean shot to the front door." Lyle took the congressman by the arm and said, "This way, sir." "Come on, Carol," called Claritin. Just as they were heading to the main doors, though, 3 people burst in, 2 men, one of them skinny, one of them with a shaved bald head, and a woman with big blonde hair, wearing smoke masks. They were pushing a large cart, and the skinny guy turned around, took a chain, and padlocked the door shut behind them. The woman and the bald guy dug into the cart and pulled out 2 guns, which they trained on Todd and the others. Lyle immediately stepped in front of Claritin. "Get down on the floor!" screamed the bald man, his voice only slightly muffled by the mask. "Face down now," seconded the woman. Claritin half emerged from behind Lyle and blurted, "You can't do this." "Just watch, Dumbo. I'm a U.S. congressman." "Really?" said the skinny guy as smoke poured in through all the vents and water rained down on the far side of the room. "I thought you were Julia Child." "That includes you, big guy, on the floor," shouted the bald man, training his gun on Lyle, "before I start blasting the shit out of you." Todd glanced at Lyle, saw his right hand ever so slightly begin to rise up the side of his sport coat. Would he resist, or... A small door at the end of the curtains was suddenly thrown open, and a woman came charging right into the room. Of all people, thought Todd, staring at her in total disbelief. "Holy shit," yelled the woman as she rushed into the room, completely panic-stricken. "There's a fire in the kitchen, you..." She suddenly froze, surveyed the situation, spotted Todd. "What's going on?" Todd stared at his Channel 7 nemesis. "Cindy, where the hell did you come from?" As the leader, the guy with the shaved head, rushed toward her, brandishing his gun, Lyle reached beneath his sport coat and pulled out a pistol. With 3 bold steps, he charged across the room. Lunging at the woman with the gun, he batted the pistol from her hand, then grabbed her, spinning her around and pinning her from behind as if she were as weak as a paper doll. Pressing his pistol against her temple, Lyle shouted at the other guy, "Put down your gun!" Fuck you, Rambo!" And with that, the bald guy in the smoke mask grabbed Cindy Wilson, jabbing his gun at her head. For a weird moment, everything was oddly still as the alarm shrieked on and water poured from the lone sprinkler. Staring at the men and the woman they each held, Todd and the others were completely still, knowing he held trump. The guy holding Cindy Wilson calmly declared, "Go ahead and shoot, my friend. It doesn't make any difference, right?" Not even struggling in Lyle's grasp, the skinny blonde calmly said, "Yeah, do it. I'm next to dead anyway." But this one, he yanked on Cindy Wilson's arm, poked the barrel of his gun into her cheek. "This one doesn't want to die, do you, darling?" "No!" Cindy struggled and froze. "No, please, please!" "Shoot her!" ordered the skinny blonde. "No!" screeched Cindy, starting to buck. "I'm going to do it," yelled the leader. "On the count of 3, she's a goner unless you throw down your gun." "Please, no!" begged Cindy. 1. Cindy's terrified eyes turned to Todd. "Oh my God!" 2. Todd shouted at Lyle. "For Christ's sake, he's going to do it!" The leader steadied the gun, smiled, opened his mouth as if to speak, and Lyle lowered his pistol, then tossed it aside. "Very good," said the leader. "Now, let go of my friend." As she was released and started picking up the weapons, the skinny blonde said to Lyle, "I wasn't bluffing. An early ticket out of here would have been just fine with me." "Now all of you get down on the floor," shouted the leader, still pressing his gun to Cindy Wilson's head. "Get to work." "Righto," the scrawny guy said. "Better do just like he says, campers." Todd led the way, dropping to his knees and lying down on the now-soaked carpet. Carol and Bradley quickly followed his example, but Claritin hesitated and glanced at Lyle, who wasn't budging either. Yanking on Cindy's hair, the head guy shouted, "I'd still be real happy to shoot this one." "That won't be necessary," replied Claritin, sounding very authoritative. "Now, Lyle, please do as they say. We don't want to aggravate the situation any further." Claritin looked at the masked leader. "But I would like to discuss this and, perhaps, come to some sort of..." "Shut the fuck up. If you're not down on the floor in 2 seconds, she's dead meat." Okay. Let's not be hasty." The two men lay down, and Todd wondered if this was the beginning of an execution-style assassination. Of course, this was about Clarendon. Of course, he, the controversial politician, was their target, but his assistant, his bodyguard, and what about Bradley and Todd? Not to mention Cindy Wilson, whom the bald guy still held at gunpoint. Would any of them be left as witnesses, or would they all be eliminated? His heart surging, Todd's eyes darted about. Think, fall back on your training. Fall back on what you know. You've interviewed hundreds of people who've been through something like this. What did they do? How did they react? How did the police say they should have reacted? Okay. Yes, just 3. Yes, 1 woman, 2 men. Take it in. When he'd worked on the Crime I team, he'd seen enough to know that you only had a few precious moments to get the most important facts. Details that would be gone in an instant. Look at it all carefully, recorded in your mind. Masks. They're all wearing big black smoke masks. The woman was thick blonde hair. She's wearing a black wool coat, running shoes, long legs, skinny. One of the guys is kind of gangly. Torn jeans, ripped sweatshirt, short hair. The other guy, the leader, is also thin and has a shaved head. Face down now, the leader shouted at Todd, aiming a pistol at him. One last glance to the side told Todd that Bradley was on the floor by the tripod, while Carol was lying by a table. Clutching Cindy Wilson and pressing a gun to her head, the bald leader shouted, "Hands behind your back. Any troubles and this lady here gets a nice surprise." Smoke now gushed out of all the vents, and 2 of the intruders started dashing around, strapping everyone's hands with plastic strips. "To the big guy first," ordered the leader. "Strap his feet, too." Lyle shouted, "You shut up, asshole!" They were flex cuffs. Quick handcuffs made of plastic, realized Todd, the kind the police could strap on in seconds. Working like a pro, the woman bound up Lyle, hands and feet, then Carol and Bradley. The skinny guy put the cuffs on Todd, and then less than a minute later, he and the blonde were grabbing Clarendon and forcing him to his feet. "I don't think you want to do this," began Clarendon, trying to control his voice. "I am a United States congressman, you see, and the FBI's not going to like this. Perhaps we could talk. You're getting into a lot more trouble here than you may realize. We could talk, and I could help you. I'm sure there's something I can do for—" "Do you know how full of shit you are?" snapped the woman. And with that, she pulled out a roll of duct tape and ripped off a piece. She dragged her sleeve over his mouth to dry his face, slapped the tape over his lips, then turned to the cart and pulled out a few sheets. "Get in the laundry basket." His clothes soaked from the wet carpet, Clarendon blurted a muffled plea. "Get in!" shouted the woman. She and the gangly guy grabbed Clarendon and dumped him into the basket. They then piled the sheets back on top of him. Next, the 2 of them ran around the room, first to Carol, then Todd, the bodyguard, and finally Bradley, strapping tape over each one's mouth. Above the screaming alarm, the leader shouted, "We're going to go in the other room. We're going to be right in there, and if we hear so much as a peep from any of you, I'm going to shoot both this lady and Clarendon in the head. Got it? Don't any of you move, and don't any of you try anything stupid." "Oh my God," begged Cindy. "Just leave me. Don't take me, please. I won't cause any trouble." "Shut the fuck up," he shouted, pressing his gun so hard against Cindy Wilson's skull that her head tilted to the side. "Now listen carefully so you can spread the word. We are Americans. We are acting independently, and we are all 3 dying of AIDS. We are appalled by Congressman Clarendon's position on the AIDS epidemic. After we give the congressman a small dose of our lives, so to speak, we intend to release him. So tell the cops to leave us alone unless they really want him dead. You'll be hearing from us very soon." "Ta-ta, kids," said the gangly one. "It's been a real blast." His mouth covered with tape, Todd twisted on the floor. The leader was shoving Cindy Wilson along, and the other 2 were wheeling the cart loaded with Congressman Johnny Clarendon through the back door, the one Cindy had used. "Get down, asshole," shouted the leader at Todd. "And don't do anything stupid or this chick's dead." Todd dropped his head, his right cheek sinking into the wet carpet. The fire alarm kept on shrieking. Water from the single sprinkler rained down. Smoke continued to pump into the room, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the cry of the fire trucks. But all of this seemed almost inconsequential, for the one thing that had seized Todd's mind was the image of the guy with the shaved head. What the hell was so incredibly familiar about him? Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.